Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
I want to welcome everyone to this month's Calibration Point Podcast. Really excited to do a topic this month on succession planning, and we're going to basically take this topic and name it Thoughtful Conversations on Succession, and exploring that with basically a founder who succeeded out of his organization and his successor, who we have with us today as well. So Eric is here with us, Eric Cummings, who was the founder who left his organization strategically, I'll mind everyone, and then Jessica, who is the leader who came in behind him and has gotten to take that organization up and continue to move it. I just want to qualify for everybody listening, succession planning, and Eric, you know this very well, is something that doesn't get much attention, unfortunately, in the nonprofit sector, whether that's executive directors, as you were, whether that's board membership or key leaders. Less than, and I think 15% is probably generous, according to Bridgespan, but less than about 15% of nonprofit organizations actually engage in succession planning. And the majority of those succession plans are emergency loss plans, which is very different than what you went through in your organization, which is preparing a culture for healthy succession and growth as a part of that process. I'll say, just having been a part of your organization, known both of you as leaders in your current organizations or different organizations, I'm now getting ready to eclipse 60 founders or tenured executives that I've transitioned out of their organization. And I've been through some of the nastiest situations, I still am somewhat unimaginable to me, to some of the most amazing and fruitful. And, the process, Eric, that you went through that I got to be a part of with you definitely is one of those that I really hang on to as a grace-filled and just really rewarding experience to process with you, and just the history that I got to have with your organization, helping you to navigate and develop it. So thank you both for being here today. I think I just want to open us up, maybe Eric, if you could start, since you were the founder of your organization, as you exited strategically, you decided from, it's time, and there was nothing wrong. Your organization was growing and rolling, and it was high impact. Could you just share, as a leader, like what was it that caused you to think, okay, there's no problems here, but I want to be really reflective and strategic about beginning to think about my own succession and build a succession process? What triggered you to think that? What should a board maybe who hears this saying, okay, yeah, we should ask this about our leader, or someone who's in that position? Share with us how you came to that conclusion.
Sure. And thanks for inviting us to spend some time with you talking about this, Jamie. It was quite an experience, and your guidance and leadership and help was indispensable to that process. So,
thank you.
Regardless of where you start, I would be an advocate for succession planning, and then have a great coach to walk alongside of you as well. I think that's the inner journey part of this that I went through, that Jessica in her own, leadership before she came to Community One probably went through as well. And every leader in leadership, I would say, probably has that voice, asking that question, when's the right time? What does that look like? And my wife and I have, from the founding of the organization, worked together very closely all the way through that, and knowing that there was going to be a day that it was time to pass the baton, knowing that for the entire decade that we did that work. But like I said, the question is when.
Right.
Our organization had, moving in just before and moving into the pandemic timeframe, had just marvelously navigated a renewal of the organization: vision, values, mission, brand, investments in programs, lots of auditing, thinking, strategic planning, and a lot of that with partners in the community, including you, Jamie. And so it was just a real beautiful time of renewal in the organization. I think through that process, coming to the understanding that, hey, this organization, not necessarily because of my leadership, but because of the people and the mission, is a very healthy organization, and they're making impact and growing. And, and I think we tell ourselves stories and ask ourselves questions that we might not say out loud, but some of them might be like, what is my role here moving forward? Am I the right leader to take this organization, this renewed organization, into the next, journey of growth and expansion, and what's the best direction? And I know that leaders ask themselves those questions all along the way, especially when things are tough. But for me, I had to step into my faith a little bit on this. I feel a very strong calling from God to get into the work. And just to ask myself, Lord, how long is this going to be? What is the role? What's going to be happening? And I'll just a couple of thoughts generally. First is, I felt a very strong sense of release from the work. I wasn't running to anything, a new work, and I didn't feel like I was running away from anything, a really great organization. I felt very fulfilled and content with the decision. If this was the time to go, that the decision was mine and Linda's to make. And that no matter what we decided, stay or go, it was acceptable and good. And as long as we were healthy, it was okay, either direction. And, of course, I've been kind of counseled and coached by you and others, and understand very much the founder syndrome. And putting that into my mind and thinking, is staying healthy or is staying hurtful? The answer is probably a little of both. Mm-hmm. But in an organization that's on a great path, a great trajectory, and is healthy, I think it's a time for a founder to say, I think maybe an energetic, young, visionary leader, this is the time to pass the baton for the good of the organization, and also for my own good. Maybe there is, something beyond this. So a lot of contemplation, a lot of reflection, a lot of prayer. And of course, Jamie, I had you and others as counsel and sounding boards to kind of talk seriously about those things as well. So it feels a little bit like a kitchen sink answer, but I think it's just a journey that we all go through as leaders as we get into things. And it's probably one we should be very intentional about going through as we get out of things as well.
So Erica, before we jump to Jessica, I got a couple questions I want to just get you to think about with us. So one is, I could listen to say, oh my gosh, Jamie's got this podcast guest on and he just said things are great, so he's leaving. Don't let our executive director hear that. But what I love about what you're saying is that this should be a question that we're in a reflective culture asking as a leader. And I would much rather have affirmation that I'm supposed to be in an organization than wonder if I've got affirmation that I should leave. And if I'm asking that question on a regular basis, I can get that. And I do want, before I ask this next question to you, Eric, I want to highlight just for our listeners, the great thing about having you and your successor, Jessica, on. Jessica was a director of another organization, and your succession was planned. Jessica's was not. And, anytime that there is a successor, successee, or predecessor relationship, someone's departing from an organization and creating a succession tension in that organization as they leave. And depending on where that organization was and the culture, they may or may not have been able to be strategic in already creating a succession culture. Or it may be one of those that, hey, here's an amazing opportunity. They're the right fit and they have to take advantage of it. But their organization wasn't able to be as strategic as what you were able to do. And there are going to be impacts in that organization as well. And I try to remind everyone when we talk about succession planning is that there are two people in the equation. There's the person who's leaving our organization of focus, but then there's somebody who's coming in from somewhere else. And there's another organization of focus that's in that process as well that we just may not have control or influence over. So a question for you, and then Jessica, I'm going to ask you the same thing as the person coming in as successor. So Eric, first is, was there anything in this journey that you found just very rewarding or that great place of closure for you? Like, was there any of those that just kind of like, yeah, like this just feels so good to me? And I asked that to juxtapose it to a transition process, because a lot of times successing out is viewed as a place of dynamic tension and a cleaving process that doesn't always feel good. Was there a place for you of great reward, of great value of just affirmation as you went through this?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. I would say a couple of things. First off, the board and staff and the team that we have was incredibly affirming. I'm not saying everybody was happy with the decision,
Right.
but having that group of people around me who could understand and listen to what I was saying and see maybe if God was kind of creating some wisdom here and some opportunity for needed change or exciting adventure kind of based change, that I just felt completely affirmed and loved and appreciated by the staff and by our board. And that was just consistent throughout the entire process. We took a year to do this transition. I was talking to you at the end of the year before, and we had some conversations, and I was on the board president's doorstep on January 2nd saying, hey, this is it, man. We're going to go out together, but this is my last year. But I was able to say, but I got a buddy, Jamie Levy, who's going to be walking through this process with us, which was very comforting to him. But yeah, the board and staff were amazing and affirming through the entire process. And they gave me a long goodbye and they loved on me, and it was wonderful. And I needed that. I needed a long goodbye. And then I think the other thing that I enjoyed very much was we were very intentional about conversations. And we asked the people that we talked to, please let me tell the story. Please let me have a chance to say thank you and go back to the people who had been incredible supporters and advocates for our ministry for many, many years. And so we made those lists of communications we wanted to have, and just feels like hundreds and hundreds of conversations and coffees and sit-downs and vision casting. And I'm leaving, but the vision isn't changing. And we have this great vision for the future too. And that was so affirming. And those are things that you're afraid of, or maybe things that I was afraid of. It's like, I don't want to disappoint people. These are people that have invested in me and in us and our community this way. And so it felt a little wobbly trying to go into those conversations at first, but just the outpouring of love and congratulations, and the vision is solid. We appreciate that. We're willing to stick around for the next leader because we believe in what you're doing. Totally affirming, and was just I cannot imagine a transition that would go more beautifully than this one.
So people is what I hear you.
Yeah.
So Jessica, let's turn that to you. And I guess I should qualify my earlier statement that there are times where we have an internal candidate, and so we don't have another organization that's a part of it. In this case, the candidate was an external candidate, and you just as a great leader, amazing leader, you've shown that in your tenure already as Eric's successor. Jessica, when you came in, was there anything? Let's focus on the life-giving piece of this first. Was there anything that in your first year and your transition coming in that you're like, wow, this has been really affirming and life-giving to you, that spoke to you as you now came in behind Eric and he had departed the organization?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. I've been enjoying hearing Eric share, even though we've had many, many conversations in our transition, but just getting to hear him reminisce on this process, and it's causing a lot of warm and fuzzy feelings just thinking back to almost a year ago now that I got to join the team. There are many, many things that made this process just so seamless in a lot of ways. I think the things that stand out to me as I reflect on that would have been the communication plan. So Eric just referenced that, there was a list of who you wanted to meet with and really help share his story in his own words in the narrative that we had, but also then to make sure that all these incredible partners in our work felt really comfortable. They understood why Eric was leaving, that it was all really positive things, reinforcing that mission and vision. And I cannot say that enough for people listening to this, that especially when a founder is departing, it could have been, I had a little bit of trepidation that, oh my gosh, what if Eric leaves and everybody just loved Eric and nobody cares anymore? What if nobody wants to still be part of this work? And of course, that was not the case, because while as a founder, you do carry a lot of that, you are the face that helped to create the great work. The whole thing was about mission and vision. So when I stepped in, we had this great communication plan. It was who Eric had already met with all these strategic
Right.
partners in the work. And so then we got to go back to that list and circle through it together as founder and successor and revisit all those people that had those conversations at the first of the year. I came in fourth quarter, and we were able to touch base, introduce me, help reinforce mission and vision is still clear. We had great direction on impact strategy that we were heading in towards. And now, year into my work here, people are remembering those conversations, because now when I'm touching base with our partners, they're saying, oh, how's the work going on this block? Or how's this neighborhood working? Because Eric cast that so well. And so our community partners, they are feeling their responsibility to carry on this mission and vision. And so it's been really, really healthy. And it gave me that launching point to then continue to optimize and elevate the work into what the next iteration of our organization looks like, but to have that really, really strong foundation. And I know that can sound cliche, because people are like, oh, mission and vision and foundation. Yes, we hear this 100 times, but like that is the secret sauce. That is how you do this well, is that it's not about one personality. And I realize that as an executive director, you carry a lot of that responsibility, but ultimately it's the mission and vision that we get to do with the people we serve and our partners in that work. And so when everyone is united on that, it's going to be so much cleaner. It also helps the rest of your team in the transition too. That's another thing that I think worked really, really well. Eric had built an incredible team, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to be part of the organization, was because of the excellence in work. But that comes with, what if they really, really loved him and they don't want to be a part of what this next journey looks like? But again, that reinforcement of mission and vision and the trust in our program leads and our support staff and our teams on the ground, they felt ownership of the mission and vision as well. And they felt respected in the work and valued in the work. And that's part of the culture of our organization. And so we've had almost the entirety of our team stay with the organization throughout this first year. And that's been really important to continue the work. So I'd say those were the standout parts, but I'm coming up on my year anniversary, and I truly love getting up every morning and coming and doing this work. So
you had mentioned, so just to kind of wrap up, 3 things on the positive affirmation front. Eric, you hit on relationships, and I remember in our early processing, we talked about flooding relationships, and you did that amazingly well. And Jessica, coming in our work in post-merged organizations, the number one reason that the people who were truly loyal to the organization leave is because they feel that the vision and the values and the mission were corrupted in some way by the change. Succession of a founder is one of those things where, if it's not, to your point, and I love that you're picking up on that you saw that, if it's not grounded to the vision, it's easy for it to start to feel transactional in the change. And the fact that, you identified the fruits of what Eric sowed, which was relationships, but grounded back to mission and vision. And you saw both of those in the team and how you were embraced, and the donors and volunteers. And I love your transparency and vulnerability to a degree to talk about, your fear of what if I'm not liked. And that is a really common fear as successors are coming into organizations. It's super common. And it's that insecurity of, okay, what if they don't accept me as their leader, especially when in a nonprofit sector, and the D role specifically, where the board is the primary driver of the succession process as far as the replacement, and are charged legally with hiring that person. It can increase that sense of concern by an incoming successor. So excellent points. I'm glad to see that you two really coalesce those. I guess on the flip side of that, Eric, as you came in, I tell founders that I'm transitioning and talked with you about it a lot in the front. And that is that just know that at some point you get hit with these emotional kind of rogue waves, and, you're changing identity, you're changing meaning, value, leadership, day-to-day routines. The key is you can't react to them. You just have to let them kind of flow over you, and then just keep processing forward. Was there anything in your transition process that hit you harder than you expected, or was more complex than you expected, or just, more not from a challenge perspective, but maybe something that popped up that you just didn't see or you weren't expecting? Was there anything that grabbed you in that process from that perspective?
I just really aware that this type of a transition, man, there are so many opportunities for things to go sideways and go wrong. Hurt feelings, misunderstood ideas, misdirected energy, bad decisions. There's just so many ways. There's so many things that can go wrong in something like this. And I think the planning piece, holding things loosely. I mean, there is all sorts of biblical context around this type of transition. And I heard somebody say it really well recently: never build anything that you love so much that you can't change it.
Right.
I think that's a really important concept in organizations too. And especially for founders who are listening, you have to be able to let things go. You have to be able to see the long game on a transition like this. Once you've made the decision to go, you've released the organization.
Right.
And you just need to live in that and celebrate that, because, you're giving permission for this to change and for everything in it to change. So I would just say, I feel again, and I would just, that it went as well as any transition could go. But all along the way, as we process through the details and the logistics of that, boy, there are so many places along the way that it can fall apart. You can't over communicate, you can't over listen, and you just need to be out in front of these things and letting them come, and then dealing with them in the best way that you can if they do pop up. And again, it builds a case for succession and transition planning. It builds a case for having great people around you to coach and guide through that process. This is not a solo sport or activity,
right,
just like leadership isn't.
Right.
And you need a chorus of voices speaking into it.
Yeah, and to that point, I just want to highlight what you're saying, but also for all of our listeners, we do a couple different executive director wellness assessments. Some are regional, some are national. One thing that the national ones and the regional ones always reflect on are that executive directors identify that their role is very lonely. And we probably get 45%, close to 50% of executive directors on the national assessments identifying that they feel alone in their position. And you hit that really well, Eric. When an ED starts to feel alone, we've got to understand that, because if they ever succeed out, going through the process that you went through feeling alone would not be healthy. Yeah. And that's such a good point that you bring up. Jessica, same question, but now from your vantage, as you went into this process, as you then came through, was there anything for you that was harder than you expected, or more emotionally taxing than you thought, or just a curveball that you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, that you just hadn't thought about? Anything on the succeeding role that people ought to just be aware of?
I think one of the things that I didn't expect that kind of threw me off was that I knew Eric was great already. I already loved the organization, but then getting to overlap with him for 3 months, I was seeing in meetings together and seeing firsthand just the respect that the team had for Eric, and that for many, he was in a mentor role as well as a leader role.
Right.
And I had that moment of, I know if this is a podcast, so you're just listening, Eric has a very youthful voice and is a younger person, but he is older than me. And I knew that he could have more of a mentor relationship with some of the team, whereas I'm more a peer or even younger than some on our team. And I had this moment where I thought, I've been thinking about, partner relationships, strategic visioning, all these things that I knew I could bring skills to the table on. And I thought, well, I can't control how old I am, or, those things about you that you are out of your control. And so I started thinking, okay, how do I do that? And I had to talk with mentors in my own life and coaches about how that's okay, that you find what you lead in really well, where your strengths are. And then if there's things that you just can't bring to the table, you can find others to fill those voids, whether it's someone on your board or in addition to your team. And so that was part of it that I was like, well, that's not a skill I can learn. That's just something that I have to bring other people into this work. And so to your point about loneliness, while it can feel daunting at times because ultimately you have to make decisions that impact a lot of other people and you have to make those by yourself, at the very end of the day, you can still bring so many people into your tribe to help you with decision making, to help round out who you are as a person. And so those were some things that I thought like, oh, I didn't think about that. I was thinking about what's black and white on the paper, what's on the job posting that I can fill or learn how to do. And so that's one that sticks out to me. I know this isn't the Compliment Eric podcast, but I do want to recognize that Eric had such a great self-awareness in this process. And even when we were overlapping, there'd be days where he was like, you know what, in the afternoon, I'm going to go take care of some things. Why don't you spend some time with the team by yourself? Or why don't you have this coffee by yourself with this partner and let me have moments by myself when I needed that, and then knew to step in and help provide context when that was needed. And so that was just invaluable to be overlapping with someone who just had a tremendous self-awareness during this process. So thank you, Eric, for doing that.
Well, I like your
on
comment.
the podcast, just to give some context on the timeline too, we started the beginning of a year and gave it a 1 year, January to December. And then our hope was that we, over the course of the first part of the year and into the middle of the year, we would identify our candidate and hire, and then have the whole fourth quarter, October to December. And then I would leave at the end of the year. And that's precisely what happened. So we took a year to do it. And I don't know if that's possible for everyone, but I think the timeline is an important component, because the time that we spent together, just affirmed my confidence in Jessica's leadership, and that this ship was sailing in a great direction. And I'm glad to hear that was helpful to her too.
Yeah, that's really good. And to your point, Jessica, your predecessor as a mentor to the staff isn't in the job description. It's a really good point you bring up. And it's something we see a lot with incoming successors, is that it's typically the intangibles that they didn't see, that don't show up on a job description, that don't show up on a role responsibility, that, oh, so they were doing that. And is that unwritten expectation? Am I supposed to fill those shoes? And I, not too long ago, went through kind of an executive mediation process with the board and executive director. And here was the situation. This was an incoming newer executive director who succeeded a long time tenured founder. And there was a lot of conflict. And so it had continued. It's like we were in this constant spot the problem, solve it, spot the problem, solve it, but it never went away. So they asked me to do mediation with them. And there was some background work we did. But in essence, what happened and what we were able to come to clarity on was that the executive director was carrying a whole lot of unwritten expectations that they created in their own narrative, but did not translate that or communicate that to the board. And the board was not holding them responsible for those unwritten expectations. They themselves were. And as you can imagine, if I'm carrying this weight of, just use the example you mentioned, Jessica, as I'm supposed to be mentoring this team. If you think that's what you're supposed to do, even though it's never been discussed, that automatically changes the lens on how you see your board and how you're relating with staff, because you have this expectation that you don't think is ever being met, or that you're not capable of being met. And then that's going to impact the confidence in your voice as a leader, et cetera. And this was happening. It was just this crazy cycle. And we had to break the cycle. And that's where the whole mediation process came into play. So it's great that you're able to voice that. It's very common. I think a great place to close this with, Eric, is, you made the comment that there's so many things in a succession process where the wheels can kind of fall off, and it can kind of fall apart or go sideways. And Jessica, you identified mission, vision, and the relationship, and you being accepted. Acceptance goes two ways. And one of the things that I definitely can remark on in you coming into this role is how accepting you are as a leader, but also that you don't settle for comfort zones within a team. You push people to become better than they are. And it's who you are as a leader. It's what I've seen in you being in this organization. It's also why you were right for this role, because that's the kind of leadership that you bring to the table. And there's one of the things that can go wrong is hiring the wrong person. And to your point, Eric, and to you, Jessica, on being the right person, if it wasn't as pensive as it was, an organization could hire the wrong person, and it's much harder to release someone than it is to hire them, and a lot more complicated, as we know. And the pensiveness that you put into this, your board, your staff, Eric, the care that you'd already sown in, and then Jessica, the kind of leader that I've seen that you are naturally able to reap the fruits because you were a leader who was able to see the fruit. And I just think one of the things I see with successors who come in is that it's very easy for them not to, maybe not to is the wrong word. It's very easy for them to take for granted the non-market-based skills that they have, their ability to see in a culture, their ability to see how to intervene and build relational equity and to empower people. And you've done that naturally, but not everybody can see. And not everyone would see the things, Eric, that you've done. And it is you guys have a great story as an organization and how you have developed that. Before I give just one little closing anecdote, Eric, Jessica, one, thank you for being on. Do you have any closing lingering thoughts that listeners need to be aware of before we close down?
I just want to build on what you said, Jamie, which I think is important. We didn't set out to hire another me.
Right.
We needed somebody else, somebody with a different skill set, somebody who could take the organization in a different direction. And just an encouragement for those people in succession planning or around succession planning to think very, very deeply about the needs of the organization in the future. And, in many, many ways, Jessica is far superior to my leadership in ways that this organization really needed in its next journey. And be able to see into that and don't get another founder. You're not a founded organization anymore. Right. You're moving. So be thoughtful about those types of things as you look forward.
Really good. Yeah. Just anything from you to close on?
I would add for anyone coming in a successor standpoint, as we shared, Eric and I had a really great relationship. So that made the process better, having that mutual respect for the person that comes before you and after you. But if you are a successor stepping into, maybe you didn't get to meet the person before you, maybe it was a bad situation, you can still have a respect for the work that was done. Even if you didn't overlap with that person or there was, some type of issue going on there. And I think that helps build a strong step into the future when you can speak with respect and care for the work that was done that made it possible for you to then bring your skills and strengths to the table. I say all the time when I'm meeting with our supporters that I'm not speaking poorly on myself, but I just wouldn't have had what it took to create an organization from scratch. That was every strength. Eric was the right person for every step of the way. And I believe that God placed him in that opportunity. And so what a gift now that I get to step into something that was founded by someone with great intention and care. And now I get to bring the skills and strengths that God blessed me with alongside an incredible team to continue to do this work. And so just never losing that appreciation and respect for what came before you.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And you two are very different leaders, but you also share commonality in humility and grace and vision. Fundamentally, you're very different in your style and how you navigate, et cetera. And to your point, and I love that, Eric, they weren't hiring another you. And to your point, Jessica, being able to come in and make sure that we are reflective and understanding what we've come into and appreciating that. I'll close with just and Eric, you've heard this, but it's something I use a lot when I work with founders, especially. And that is, since you mentioned a biblical example earlier, in scripture, there are 3 examples that I use a lot of, at least to get people thinking about leadership. And one was a guy named Moses, and his successor was another guy named Joshua. And it was very coaching and mentorship filled and fruitful. And then there was a guy named King David, and King David was the succeeding leader of another guy named Saul, and Saul sought out to kill him because of his insecurities, and that was the person coming in to succeed him. And then there was King David and his son Absalom, who for 2 years tried to undermine his leadership and then assassinate him or have him killed. And I say that because in all those scenarios, pride and emotions and power can get caught up. And it's so easy in an organization, especially for pride, to get in the way in Cloud Vision. You two have hallmarked a lot of grace and humility in your process that you've gone through this. And it's just so evident in the organization and who you are as leaders, and the amazing success, Jessica, that you're having coming in behind Eric, and Eric in this new chapter of your life in leadership, but in a completely different organization, a completely new role. You've continued that forward. So I thank you both for coming on. This has been great. I really appreciate you. And we'll have conversations in our title. So everybody stay tuned. We will have some more of these conversations with the dynamic duo in the future.
Awesome.
Thank
you,
you.
Jamie.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.